Welcome to the Doyenne of Death Podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyen is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. Well, that's Gail. She knows all about creating the party no one wants to plan, a funeral or memorial service. She discusses the changes death can bring, and she'll make you laugh. This series includes episodes previously released as A Good Goodbye, a treasure trove of evergreen podcasts about funeral planning issues. This podcast reveals some of the mysteries and shares advice and tools that can reduce stress at times of grief, minimize family conflict, and help create a good goodbye. Remember, just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. So, here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
Welcome. This is part 2 of our 2-part episode. If you missed part 1, do yourself a favor and go back to listen. And now back to more with the Doyenne of Death.
Welcome back. We are talking about Greek Orthodox funeral traditions, and Father Conan Gill with the St. George Greek Orthodox Church. Tell me, what is a presbytera?
Okay.
Presbytera.
Presbytera is, it's similar to the word presbyter or presbyteros, which is priest, but a presbytera is simply the wife of a priest. So, and the wife of a deacon would be called a diakonissa, but a presbytera is simply put as a wife of a priest.
Okay, so I'm guessing people might not know that priests in Greek Orthodox can get married?
Well, priests cannot, but laymen can be married and then become priests.
Oh.
If anything happened to my presbytera, if, God forbid, she were to pass away before me or just be done with putting up with me and leave me, then I would have two choices, either one, to leave the priesthood if I wish to remarry, or to live out the rest of my life as celibate.
So you are married?
I am married with 2 kids and 1 coming.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So when are there any special instructions that one would need to know about for doing funerals for special women or men in the church?
No, not really. With the presbytera, the prayers are going to stay the same with regard to the funeral service itself, although she will be given the title. She'll be referred to as whatever her name is in presbytera. So, so-and-so the presbytera is how she would be referred to. But there's really not any other changes with regard to that or to any of the other lay positions in the church with like readers and that kind of thing. But the person who would be making the arrangements for a presbytera should talk to the priest about any special preparations to be done. Now, as far as when priests pass away, the service changes a little bit depending on who says what prayer and how many priests are present, and this kind of thing. And actually, the service before the funeral is quite different because there is a Trisagion done the day before, just like it is with a lay person, except the other priests in the area or within the archdiocese or the metropolis will get together, and there is a service for dressing the priest. The priest will be dressed in his vestments. his body will be washed. There will be a Trisagion while his body is washed and prepared, and then he will be dressed. They will conclude the Trisagion, and then, of course, his body will be taken into the church. Trisagion will be done with the faithful in the church, and his body will stay in the church overnight. And then the funeral services themselves change depending on when the service is. If it's during Bright Week, which was last week, it's the week after Pascha or after Easter, Passover. The service really changes quite dramatically. And then also if the service is for an infant or a child who has fallen asleep, especially like under the age of 7, then it's a special service that's found in the pre-service book. And then, like I said, the funerals for bishops and priests and deacons change a little bit depending on who is there, how many clergy people are there, and just certain prayers are repeated over and over. So.
Well, and that was one of the things that struck me about the service, that chanting of so-and-so has fallen asleep. And that got said a lot.
Yes. Right.
And what wonderful imagery it invokes in the congregation.
Right.
So the fact that they've fallen asleep, is it to this world, but they're awakening in the next?
Yeah, I mean, when you ask, what is death? I mean, for Orthodox, nobody's really dead; they're asleep. It's, we'll often say that death is an event in life, or maybe the event, and which maybe defines or limits or exhausts us. But falling asleep, it's the separation of the soul from the body, and it's the disintegration of the body. It's when the body returns to the dust from which it came. But the man's soul returns to its source. Our soul returns to its source, and it's we oftentimes will look at what people call death or falling asleep. We say it's that it's just one of the stages of life. It's, and oftentimes I think about it like a birth. My wife Presbytera is pregnant with our 3rd son, and I think about that little baby, that little boy in the womb. He doesn't know any better. He loves it there. He's fed. He's nurtured. It's protected. I can feel her belly, and he's jumping around and kicking and pushing and doing all this kind of stuff. But the day will come when he will have to leave that state of security and come into this world. And when he comes in, he'll come in, not happy, as a clam. He'll come in screaming and fighting and crying and all this kind of stuff. And he'll cling to mama, and finally he'll recognize me. And but if you were to ask him, are you ready to leave the womb and come into this world? If you could ask him that, his answer would be, of course not. I've got everything I need right here. Why would I want to go somewhere where I have no idea what's gonna befall me? What's there for me? And it's the same thing with us when we pass away. It's the anxiety of not knowing what's to come. Do we? Even St. Paul said, he said, he looks forward to the next life, but I mean, gosh, he doesn't really wants to hold on to what we've got here, because that's what we know. It's it's what's comfortable. But one day, as we get older or whatever, and we start to decline, and our reflexes slow down, and our memory lapses, and that kind of stuff, the condition of the body will deteriorate, and the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And we'll move on. So death is really nothing. Death is really nothing more than a birth. And that's the reason why the church celebrates the memory of the saints. Not on the anniversary of their earthly birth, but on the anniversary of their death, because it's their birth into eternity.
Oh, okay.
As Orthodox, we're named after saints.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're given those names to try to emulate that life in Christ.
Mm-hmm. So let's look at another practical issue. Cremation is very much a growing trend in the United States. What is the Greek Orthodox opinion on cremation?
Yeah, well, it's Orthodox is Orthodox. The stance on cremation will be the same. Will not change depending on the flavor of the orthodoxy, the ethnic surroundings of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And the church considers cremation to be, the deliberate desecration of what God has made. Even like the pagans, the Jews always considered the body to be very sacred, and it took care of it. The pagans, they burned the body, and we would never do that. We instead insist that the body be buried so the natural process of decomposition can take place. And, of course, burial affirms the fundamental goodness of creation. It attests to our belief in the body as like I said earlier, is this temple of the Holy Spirit, and it affirms our faith in the resurrection of the dead. If a body will be or has been cremated, there can be no funeral service in the church or at the funeral home or any other location. Moreover, it really restricts our memorial services. With koliva.
Talk about the koliva.
Koliva is a boiled wheat, and it's mixed with raisins, or my favorite is with pomegranate. And it's heaped up, and powdered sugar is put upon it, and oftentimes the initials of the departed is put on there, or maybe the letters representing the name of Jesus Christ, ICXC, Isis Christos, are put on there, and candles are put on it, and it's brought to the church on the days of memorial, and we have to have this koliva to have a memorial. You have to have koliva to have a memorial.
And so, do you eat this, or
You do. It's quite delicious.
Okay.
Very good. And it's the almonds or the bulgur wheat. It has the candy in it, or the pomegranate. So you have the sweetness of that, and kind of almost the bitterness of the bulgur, of the wheat, and it kind of reminds us of the, not the sourness, but of the kind of the problems of this world we have with the wheat, and then also the sweetness of the raisins or of the pomegranates, reminds us of the time to come, sweetness of what's ahead.
The bitter and the sweet.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, we're going to have to go to another break just here momentarily, but we'll continue the conversation, koliva and everything else soon.
Gail Rubin, the Doyenne of Death, has been producing Before I Die festivals for years. These festivals get end-of-life planning conversations started by putting the fun in funeral planning. Outside-the-box activities break down barriers to discussing death and planning for our 100% mortality rate. And now, Gail has created the Before I Die Festival in a Box, the comprehensive guide to producing your own community festival. It includes everything you need to create a successful event: how to find sponsors, build a team, market the event, schedule speakers, topics for discussion, workshop ideas, and much, much more. To learn how to get your Before I Die Festival in a Box, visit beforeIdiefestivals.com or call 505-265-6999. 888-888-7215.
Welcome back. Continuing our conversation about Greek Orthodox funeral traditions with Father Conan Gill. So we were talking about cremation, and I know the Catholic Church is now allowing cremation, and more Reformed branches of Judaism are, but it sounds like you get cremated, you don't get a Greek Orthodox funeral.
Yeah, well, that depends on, I guess. And if we look at some countries, like I believe Japan and maybe Finland or Sweden, I'll have to look into that. I'll have to brush up on that. But there's a couple of countries where you're not allowed to be buried. And so the state itself says, that's all that's open to you is cremation. And for those people living in those places, of course, the church would allow that. But yeah, it does. When you talk about cremation, it does spark some controversy, and some people can be very upset, especially when they come to the church and want to be cremated and then want an Orthodox service. They're kind of taken back when they can't. And I don't know. I try to think of it like I don't know if you like gardening. I love gardening. I mean, I love it. I love planting things and especially food, what can grow up and I can eat. But, whenever I prepare my garden every year, I get the soil, I till it, I do everything I need to it, fertilize it, this kind of thing, and I go down and I buy my seed, and then I put it in the ground, and I water it. I go out every day and I water it. And I never go outside and water that seed, that patch of ground, expecting nothing to come up. I mean, that would be ludicrous, right? But I water it, and I water it with the expectation that one day I'll walk outside and a little monocotyledon or dicotyledon will poke its head out, and and I'll see what I've done and what God has blessed. And it's the same thing with us. When we pass away, our seed, our body is put into the earth, and one day, that seed will be called forward and will be given, new, blessed bodies, and will be reunited. So, it's. I think it's important that we understand that cremation is not something that the Orthodox Church clamors after or thinks is right. It's not treating the body with respect. But who can have an Orthodox funeral is not the same thing as as funeral services conducted by others. The Orthodox funeral service is very specifically a burial service, as its name in Greek, it's akoulouthia kidias indicates. It's a burial service. So if there is not a burial, it's logic that we wouldn't be conducting a burial service. If there's nothing to bury, we would be doing the service. Likewise, so if somebody was lost at sea, or the body was not buried, was cremated, for instance, we just wouldn't be doing a burial service. So the Orthodox funeral service is all about the body. No body, no funeral.
Okay.
And
do you have to be Greek Orthodox? I mean, there's intermarriage of Greek Orthodox with other Christians who are not Greek Orthodox.
Right. You'd have to be Orthodox. You would have to be Orthodox to get that. There is a service in my prayer book for a non-Orthodox person, for a service for them, but it's not typically done. It's only done in case there was no clergy at all, of anybody's faith. Then I could do a very short service, but yeah, they would have to be Orthodox, and for good reason. I mean, there's, like I said, there's no real eulogies. People can't stand up in the middle of the service and say whatever they want. So, that can oftentimes, hinder people and what they want to do. It's very, very, it's set. So there's no real leeway. But, I do have several parishioners who are not Orthodox who are not even Greek. I myself am not Greek, and that's not a problem. But we do have a lot of intermarriage, and I oftentimes attend funerals for parishioners, for their spouses that have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't bury them, in the church.
Okay.
Yeah, and not everybody, everybody who's Orthodox, everybody's, of course, can receive a funeral, but not everyone can receive even Orthodox can receive, burial in the church. Those people who have alienated themselves from the church, they'll get buried, but maybe not in the church. It's just those people who are baptized and chrismated, who marry civilly but are not married in the church. They would not be allowed.
The burial.
Divorced, they wouldn't get a church divorce. They wouldn't get a church burial. We could bury them, but we may not have the service in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they're divorced but haven't gotten an ecclesiastical divorce, or those who have done some very grievous sin like murder but have refused to confess it, to turn away from that. Those who have committed suicide, and that's again a touchy subject because oftentimes with suicide, we have a condition of mental illness or just great distress. So the priest, along with the bishop, really has to look into that and be very discerning and prayerful.
Because otherwise, or maybe earlier, a suicide would be considered an affront to God, and then you could get that funeral in the church. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or murder, right. So we were going to go back to Macaria, the post-funeral meal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, is that also known as a meal of condolence? Did I read that somewhere?
Yeah, oftentimes, though, I'll explain it to people as a mercy meal. But really, it's kind of interesting. When you look at Macaria, the word itself, it's related to the word Makarios. Makarios is the Greek word for blessed. So, for instance, in the New Testament, when Christ gives the Beatitudes, those are the blessings. So it's a blessed meal, and early Christians, it's interesting. Early Christians were instructed by the fathers of the church to do works of charity in honor of a deceased person, of their family. In fact, St. John Chrysostom writes about that in the 300s, and one expression was to prepare a meal after the funeral or after memorials for the family and the friends and the poor of the community. In fact, an early canon, an early canon of the church from 375 to 380 calls it those meals be orderly and modest. And fish, being a food used during fasting periods or was appropriate to the seriousness of the occasion. And we typically don't use flesh meats because flesh meats are usually they're an example of feasting. But we use typically, that doesn't mean that we have to, but typically we will use fish will be served for the reason, of course, because Christ ate fish after his death and resurrection. We read about that in Luke chapter 24. And fish is served as the main dish because it was also an ancient symbol for Christianity, for Christians. So that's typically what we'll eat.
And sweets, fish and sweets, or fruit, pastries?
Usually some butter cookies, some Greek butter cookies are usually there, or some paxamadia, which is kind of like it's a Greek version of biscotti that you dip in like coffee or something like that. Typically, there will be like a shot or something of Cipro or Ouzo or maybe like a Greek brandy that people have out, but that's not that's little T tradition. That's not part of the, something that has to be done.
So a little alcohol is okay.
Yep, a little alcohol is okay.
Okay. And so at this post-funeral meal, that's when you would have storytelling, eulogy sharing. That's the most appropriate time to do that.
Right. It would be the most appropriate time for the family or for loved ones to get up and say something about the deceased. Like I said, the Trisagion, the memorial, the Memosino, the funeral service itself, there's really not a chance to speak, and that's oftentimes people will want to say something, especially at the funeral home. Family will oftentimes say, I want to say something, and I tell them, well, it's not appropriate, but if you must, then I'll dismiss myself, is what I typically try to do.
And real quickly, we're running out of time. Oh no. Are there memorial services held annually after a funeral or on any kind of time frame? Yeah. Memorials,
typically what we do is we have a Trisagion can be done at the time of death on the third day in honor of the Trinity, and Christ's 3-day burial can be done on the 9th day in honor of the angels, on the 40th day in honor of Christ's 40 days on earth after his resurrection. It can be done 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, and really any time the family feels the need. The memorial service, that's a Trisagion. Memorial service is a little bit longer service. It's typically done on the 40 days, and again, you have to have the koliva. Some of the Arabic Orthodox traditions, they will bring like a bread. Koliva is not really within their tradition, but so some things change a little bit. But yeah.
Well, Father Conan Gill with St. George Greek Orthodox Church, thank you so much. This has been so interesting and enlightening, and I feel like we could still keep talking for another hour, but
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Our time is up. Thank you for listening to A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, and check my website, agoodgoodbye.com.
Gail Rubin, the Doyenne of Death, is the author of 3 award-winning books. In A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, learn how to save money, reduce family conflict, and minimize stress at a time of grief. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. Kicking the Bucket List, 100 Downsizing and Organizing Things to Do Before You Die, brings a light touch to downsizing and organizing for end-of-life issues. And Hail and Farewell, Cremation Ceremonies, Templates and Tips, helps you easily create meaningful memorial services with sample scripts, suggested readings, and music recommendations. These fine books by Gail Rubin, The Doyenne of Death, are available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. For more information, visit agoodgoodbye.com. Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death Podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.